prior to that, what was the reality of growing up in the hood? I think I saw you say it's one of the most racist cities in America.
Yeah, I think it's like, and when I say that, it's really based off of a segregation idea. So like a systemic thing more. So basically like the systematic structure of America is racist, right? So like I was brought here on a slave ship. Not every, minority was brought here on a slave ship, but specifically like me, I was brought here like on a slave ship and, wasn't treated as a human being for most of the parts that my lineage was in America. And then once, we were voted as 1/3 of a person or whatever, still wasn't getting that. And then once we did get the right to vote, they didn't want us to vote, so they were lynching us for that shit. And eventually, once we got to whatever every man is created equal, there's still, mass oppression. There's still we're doing an interview right now. Vlad primarily, I think, does a lot of interviews with rappers. So, we know there's a whole rap industry that, perpetuates a stereotype or an idea of who African Americans are, not just to themselves, but to people outside of them. So, school to prison pipelines, and there's so many different things that are wrapped into hip hop. So when I think about, when I say that, like Chicago is one of the most racist cities, I say that from a segregation standpoint. If you ever go to Chicago, all of the communities are very separated and they are very kept into their niche. So you'll see Black people primarily on the south side, Black people primarily on the west side, and white people primarily on the north side. And you might just think, oh, well, that's just because they don't want to live together. Well, it is. There was this thing called redlining and the Black Belt that I want everybody that's watching this interview to go research, because there's so much focus on the Black community right now when it comes to movies, music, television, that I also think you guys should figure out, doing some kind of research to check these things out. But what I'm talking about specifically, it's called the red line, or redlining, and it was really called the Black Belt in Chicago. And it was this idea that, not even an idea, it was a real thing. So basically when Black people started to migrate from the South and then start to move up north in search of better jobs and whatnot, they got to Chicago and all of these white people were like, oh no, we don't want these Black people buying these houses. So they started to do something called redlining with the banks, where the banks were not allowed to give loans to Black home buyers or people, Black folks that wanted to move up north, primarily where the nicer housing was. And then they created the Black Belt, which was if you were a home owner or a home seller, that you could not sell a house at market price to anybody that was Black. And as those Black people started to move into those spaces on the south side and west side where white people also were located, they either moved to the south side or moved to the north side. And there's actually, this is something that's very important, I want all of you guys to research. There was a summer, it's called the Red Summer. And no amount of violence that they have ever tried to push to you on the news or in any tabloids measures up to the amount of violence of this one day. And it all started at Oak Street Beach. There was a young Black boy that was swimming in the water, and he had crossed over back in this point to the white side of the beach, right? So these white kids started to chuck these rocks at him. This is a young Black kid, and these grown white folks, they're chucking these rocks at this Black kid, and basically he has a phobia of trying to get to the sand because he's getting hit with rocks, and he ends up drowning in the water. And there was this huge bloody fight that multiple people died in, half the city was burnt. Like, there's so many different things that surround that incident. But those things are what led to the Black Belt, led to redlining, which led to young Larry Hoovers and young Jeff Fords, which are the leaders and the organizers of these different communities coming together and creating these gangs that were built to protect and to serve and to help the community. And those things came from Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton that were a part of the Black Panther organization that was started in Chicago. And those people had after school and before school breakfast programs. We had activities. These were resources and spaces and environments for us to grow and learn more about who we were, that weren't set by the Chicago public school system. And today you see a lot of lost young men that look just like me because they don't have these outlets. They don't have academic extracurriculars. They don't have, those things have been taken. And what we do have, and I think this is one of the most profound things that I can say on this show, is we are now perpetuating the image that Chief Keef or Lil Durk or I or any other artist from the South Side of Chicago would rather be living the life that we are forced to live by the system. Some shit that is way bigger than YouTube or anything else. People do believe that we would rather do those things, rather ride around with choppers, rather be on, Parkway Gardens, rather than have an equal opportunity at living, to have the resources for our families to go to schools, to have generational wealth, to have ownership, to know who we are, to be informed on what's going on in America and throughout the world.
Right.
That is not true. We want those things so much more than we want diamonds, cars, lean, drugs, anything that you could ever prescribe to us. That's what we want. So when I say like Chicago is racist, I mean it from that perspective, not so much from the perspective of just white people screaming the N-word out their car and stuff like that. You don't even have to do that anymore if I already feel like that's who I am based off the systematic structure, again, that's forced that.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you are incredibly well spoken. I feel like
Thank you.
There's so much insight, and you're just I appreciate that. But I also saw growing up, people said you talk white.
That's my brother's line.
Oh, okay.
People did say that. And I think that clearly, so check this out. Like one of the biggest things when slaves were first brought to America is that they were not supposed to gather in large groups, right? The only time that Black people were actually allowed to later on in time to gather in large groups was at church, which is why the church is one of the beacons of our community, right? But Black people were literally stripped of reading, writing, all of those different materials during this slavery that started with European colonization, right? So there has always been a push, no matter if it's to use slang, no matter if it's to, and I'm going to say this is the truth about it. I want everybody that's paying attention to this. Once we learn how to express ourselves the way that we learn how to dance and be rhythmically inclined, we will, and the whole goal is for us to never be able to, because, and I'll just tell you, there's a lot of things that make people embarrassed. There's nothing that embarrasses certain people more than being embarrassed, because they've never been oppressed and they don't understand that. But what they do understand is when people embarrass them and they make them feel guilty. But if you can't express yourself, if you can't control yourself, if you can't conduct yourself in a formal conversation, how can you ever get anything, get anywhere in your conversation if you're not thinking about what you want or being able to really, again, express that? You know what I'm saying? So
I love that, man. And I know you attended urban prep high school. Were you always good grades,
No.
Oh, okay. No?
No. So I had an IEP. I had an individual educational plan, or in California, they call them 504 plans.
Got it.
But it's basically like they said that I had a learning disability. So I use that sometimes when I was younger, I think a little bit to my advantage, or I thought I was using it to my advantage, because there were things I was missing out on and I was having time to focus on music or whatever I wanted to do at that point in time. But I failed a lot of stuff or passed certain classes that I probably shouldn't have passed if I didn't have my IEP. But no, I was never a straight A student. Very far from it.